Hello, everyone. I'm glad that you realized we changed the time because there might be some that will be appearing in a half an hour and didn't realize that. But I'm glad all of you are alert and paying attention to detail. That's great. And we changed it to a half an hour earlier because we have Hannah J speaking today from Australia. So she informed us it's 11 o'clock p.m. for her. So we have put her first, and that's why we moved it a little earlier. I'm just giving another minute or two because I see that the number of people is still increasing. So I just want to give another minute and see if anybody else joins. We have an exciting agenda today, and we know that for some people in Europe, it's really in the middle of summer, and so there's a number of people on leave. And I also know that it's winter in other places, so it's a good mix of seasons here. But we might have a low turnout because of the time. We will record so that, or we are recording, so that this can be shared afterwards for those who miss it. So I'm excited to say that we're starting off with the GBV AoR competency framework, which is it's a revision or update, but really I think it's new in a lot of ways because we have included the profile of information management, which we didn't have before. So a long way we've come on this. And just so you know, people are so excited that the PSEA people already contacted us to find out how our competency framework looks like, because they want to do one for PSEA. So a lot of enthusiasm. And then just to say, all of you on this call, as well as our other colleagues who are not here, are advocates, because we don't want this to be a document that's in a file. And we really need for you to share this with your human resource people, because it's critical importance that it get utilized. And really, there's multiple reasons which we're going to hear why you should use it. And I also want to recognize BHA who funded this, and I see we have Reem on the call. So we also want to say thank you to BHA for the funding for Hannah J and for this important piece of work. So I am going to hand over to Hannah, who is, by the way, just to say a few glowing words about Hannah J. She is the same consultant who did our 2 strategies. So she knows us well. She's done lots of consultations in the past, and many of you participated in this process. So thank you also, all of you who did contribute. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for allowing me the top billing in this, or the first billing in this call. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so I wanted to also say thanks to the core members that we have on the call that were involved in the consultation and that were able to review the drafts. It was really critical to get the feedback that we did get from this group, and as well as the coordinators, IMs and other stakeholders that really went into the development of these frameworks. So as Jennifer mentioned, it is a refresh for the GBV coordination competency framework, but the IM competency framework is completely new, which is really exciting. And just to give the little bit of the background, so the original GBV AoR core competencies, as they were called, was developed in 2014. So it has been quite a long time. And since then, there's been obviously a number of key documents that have come out, which really have informed the development of these competency frameworks. And then I just want to also acknowledge that we looked at and drew from several other competency frameworks and also looked at alignment with the UNFPA competency framework, the Child Protection Coordination and IM competency framework, and also the not yet published but in draft Global Protection Cluster Coordination Functional Framework is theirs. So there are, as Jennifer was speaking, we really want these competency frameworks and the accompanying tools, which I'll talk about as well, to be useful and to be used. And I think there's a few ways that they can be useful and used. And I guess a key one is in recruitment. They're quite detailed documents, and hopefully they can inform both, you know, the side of recruitment in terms of how we develop the parameters of who we're looking for, but also in terms of drawing in people and giving a benchmark for those professionals who might be interested in getting into GBV coordination or GBV IM. Also in terms of professional development for those that are already in coordination or IM roles, or potentially those that are looking to move into those roles as well. And a key thing there will be the self-assessment tool, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. I know we don't have heaps of time, so I'll zoom through. And I think also importantly, just to mention, Jennifer did say around advocacy, and I think it's great to have, you know, a detailed framework that shows exactly what it takes to be a GBV coordinator and to be a GBV IM in coordination, to use for advocacy, for getting the right people into these roles and for getting those roles resourced as well. So it was really clear in the consultation that these two competency frameworks, GBV coordinator and GBV IM, really needed to be linked, and that the two roles themselves really work hand in glove. So there was an acknowledgement that, you know, that the IM role really is a key advisor to the coordinator, as well as, you know, implementing those IM tasks, and that should be acknowledged within the competency framework. Yeah, and the structure of the frameworks themselves are the same, so that you can see throughout. And it was clear that there are a number of shared skills across the two roles that really should be highlighted within the competency frameworks as well. So you will see that when you read through the full competency frameworks, which I think have been shared in draft form, and we'll talk a little bit about next steps as well. So there's the four, all the competencies are grouped into four key areas. So the core competencies, which really are drawing from those original competencies that were developed in 2014, and are the foundational you know, competencies for working in GBV coordination, either as a coordinator or as an IM, and they're at the top level the same across both roles, although some of the detail in terms of how they're demonstrated is distinct for each of for either coordinator or IM role. Behavioural competencies. So this was another area that really came out strongly in consultation, that this needed to be acknowledged, that there are, these are really critical competencies to have, but also that there should be a clear pathway for developing these competencies. We're not all, no one is born with amazing full competency in all behavioural areas, and that actually we can look at how they can be developed, and there should be a clear roadmap for that, as well as some of the skills and behaviours potentially around functional and technical competencies that might be more obvious in terms of professional development. So the functional competencies relate to coordination skills, and technical competencies relate to those core technical knowledge and skills that you need to have on GBV to work in GBV coordination. And the way that it's set up is that each competency has a definition, and then there is a tiered approach to achieving that competency. So these under the tiers are behaviours that you would display that demonstrates your competency in that area. And so the tiers are cumulative. So it's the expectation that tier 1 would be behaviours that everyone demonstrates, and as you progress in your competency, you would then display those in tier 2 and then in tier 3. as well. And so under each of the competency, there's around between 10 and 20 of these key behaviours that demonstrate really how you are meeting that competency. And I think for those that have reviewed the draft, you will see that this is where the real meat of what it is to be in GBV coordination comes out, I think. This is the detail of, what is to be expected of GBV coordinators and GBV IMs. I think this is the feedback that we got from the coordinators and IMs themselves was that was really really useful detail, and that was what they were really looking at when they were seeing the document. And underneath this would be then also some knowledge and skills that underpin that. So they might be key resources that you're familiar with. There might be some skills around negotiation potentially, or communication, or other particular skills that support you to display those behaviours. Now, I know that many of you have reviewed the draft, but I just wanted to again highlight the point that the competency at the high level might seem quite generic, but really when you go down into the detail, either into the definition, but then also into the detail around the demonstrative behaviours, then that's where you really get to the detail of GBV coordination. So this is just a couple of examples. This is a behavioural competency, innovate and embraces change. And then you have the tiers that would exist under this competency. But I've just pulled out a few of the behaviours here so that you can see on the screen, what I'm talking about when what we're talking about when we're talking about the way in which the competencies are demonstrated. And this is really critical too, in terms of this detail under each competency also informs the way in which the competency frameworks can be, I think, taken forward in terms of implementation, and the tools that have been developed are really draw from the detail that are under each of the competencies. So each of them are again in tiered, and you'll see some of the core themes. You will see some core themes that are integrated throughout the competencies. So, for example, work with women-led organisations. That's really in almost every competency, and there's other areas such as working across the continuum, working on preparedness, that's really integrated then also throughout the competencies, to say these are things that you should be bringing to many areas of your work, as well as potentially having some standalone focus on it in certain contexts. So I would say, what we have done here is to really balance the level of detail that was needed to make this useful for coordinators and for those that are recruiting coordinators, those that are wanting to be coordinators, but still for it to be applicable across contexts. So there are, I think, some demonstrative behaviours potentially in tier 3 that are looking, at specific areas, strategic areas that might not be relevant to every single context, but are there as a way to be picked up if you're working in a particular context and wanting to extend it in particular strategic areas. That makes sense. Yeah, and as Jennifer mentioned, from the beginning in discussions with Jennifer, with Stephanie, and with the team, the focus was really on how we can move through this process, always looking at implementation of these competency frameworks, how they're going to be used, how they're going to be rolled out. So we have developed a number of tools, and a key one is the self-assessment tool, which is in draft at the moment, and I'll talk a little bit about what potential next steps are for that. And then alongside that, some standard TORs for IM and co-coordinator have been developed. There's already a standard TOR for coordinators in the coordination handbook. So those were to complement that. And then a set of competency-based interview questions have also been developed, again, drawing from the competencies at the high level and then the details in terms of how we see them to be demonstrated. The self-assessment tool, so it's still in the process in terms of functionality, but the idea is this is a tool where that coordinators and IMs can use. So there's a separate tool for each, for coordinators and IMs, and prospective coordinators and IMs can use. And it's the way that it's been designed is to match up to specific competencies in the framework. But it won't necessarily say that as you're answering the questions. And it's really about a reflective process. So asking a number of questions around how often you do certain actions that are linked to the competencies, and then also a number of questions about how confident you are in certain areas as well. And some of those, that distinction might be clearer if you look at the examples in terms of, you know, how confident you are to respond to or manage resistance and backlash, how confident you are to advocate, things like that, versus some of the other areas which we're asking in terms of how often you would do those, and that's in terms of maybe more of the routine actions taken in coordination, you might say. So the idea with the self-assessment tool is that we're looking now at the GBV AoR is looking at functionality of that. So the plan is to have it as an online tool, something that can be filled out, and then based on your answers to the questions, and there's a number of questions for each coordination and IM, then you would be given a summary or some recommendations in terms of specific resources you might want to use, some accessible training courses, either online or in person, that you might want to take or nominate for, and you know, other tips that might relate to you in terms of where you are in your competency. This is also something that was mentioned in terms of how coordinators can work with Rigas and seek support from Rigas, and could be discussion around this competency self-assessment tool as well, in terms of getting coaching and support. Yeah, and the idea is really to focus on those tangible ways to progress the competency across the tiers as well. So Steph might want to jump in, but just quickly in terms of next steps. So I think it was mentioned that the layout design for the competency frameworks is pending at the moment, and that will happen, and then they'll be available online. Again, the focus is on usability there. So the decision was made to go for the full layout design. There's some consultants that have been working on e-learning, correct me if I'm wrong here, Steph, that are looking at the functionality of that. Okay, jump in. I think
Yeah, happy to, because so essentially the pre-testing of self-assessment tools by volunteers, the third point, that is currently underway. So some of the coordinators and maybe some of you are also online, and I can already say many things. And IMs, after the webinar that we held a few weeks back, before Hannah and my holidays, we've shared it out and had some volunteers pre-test the tools so that we can make some adjustments also in terms of how lengthy they are and how well they respond to kind of situating yourself within the competencies. And then based on that, we will finalize the tools. And then we are working, and this kind of links to the other components of the capacity strengthening strategy. We've been working on the blended e-learning and self-paced learning and of GBV coordination and emergencies program. And as part of that, there will be modules online. And as part of that, there's also the plan to put this self-assessment as an online tool, where then you can do the self-assessment and get a direct analysis of what you kind of provided and some suggestions based on that, on which areas to focus on, but also which courses are in place, and refer you to the resources in place to further develop on those parts. Yeah, I think that was all. I don't know, Hannah, if you want to jump into questions. I see there's a hand up by Christine, or if there's more content.
No, this is the end of the presentation, so I'm really happy to take questions now. Did you want to go ahead, Christine?
Thank you, Anna, for the excellent work. Yeah, and I think that's probably going to be a game changer. I'm just wondering, in regards to the self-assessment, I'm imagining that that would likely depend on the ability of the coordinator, who is undertaking the self-assessment, to be really honest, and I mean, someone would actually think that, if I say, okay, I'm not really competent in this, I'll probably be judged. So I'm wondering whether there could be an option of, or an element of a 360-degree feedback of some sort that could follow self-assessment. For example, if I'm the coordinator and I've undertaken, the self-assessment, could there be a feedback form that could also go to maybe 3 other people? It could be other GBV AoR partners that I work with, including maybe UNFPA, if I'm based at UNFPA, or if I'm a co-coordinator at IRC, it goes to someone there to also provide feedback in terms of the different competencies, and then being able to triangulate, that information to really help inform tailored maybe mentoring and further capacity enhancement for a particular coordinator, for instance. Thank you.
Thanks so
Stephanie,
much.
do you have your hand up because you want to respond?
Yeah, if I can quickly jump in, and then I'm happy to compliment. But thanks so much for the suggestion, Christine. And I think that's sort of linking more to, at least within UNFPA, the performance appraisal, like our PAT system. But I think, and this is a good opportunity for us to also clarify, this isn't intended as sort of a tool that can help us kind of check on the abilities and capabilities and core competencies of our coordinators that are already in place, but it's more intended as a personal development tool, so that, yes, of course, it's only as useful as you are honest, and for that honesty to provide space for that honesty, it's not something that we ask coordinators to fill out and then provide to us unless they wish to, but it's more intended, and like on the website, it won't provide that feedback to us, it will provide that feedback to the user, right? So it's intended for you to be able to assess yourself and then look at what are some of the areas that you might want to look further into, and what are the things. Of course, we would also like to be able to use it, for example, for the rigas that are providing ongoing support to coordinators. It can be a really powerful tool for onboarding. When you have a quite junior coordinator that might want to have much more of coaching, continued support of a riga, oftentimes at the beginning you set up a plan for development and define the areas that you want to kind of on a weekly basis or monthly basis, whatever the situation, work on, and set some goals to work towards. But with this, if you are happy to share the results, of course, then you can look at it together and look at what are the areas you want to focus on. But yeah, I mean, it's a good opportunity to just clarify that it's not intended as a test for coordinators, but more of a, really self-assessment, self-reflection tool. Hannah, I don't know if you wanted to come in. Sorry, I was a bit long in my response.
No, I think you captured it well. Thanks, Steph. Were there any other questions?
Or any comments? Do you think this is something that will be useful for you? If you want to contribute any comments, also welcome.
And maybe also while we're waiting for any further comments, to mention the third point that we didn't really look into in terms of what is its use. We also want to really work with UNFPA HR. I mean, we've already worked with Search to make sure that this will be integrated in the recruitment of Search GBV coordinators and IMs, but also with the HR focal points and regions to make sure that they know about this tool, that they can make use of it. We have the list of questions for competency-based assessments that come with the core competency list. So yeah, this is maybe also a shout out to all other organizations to share it within your organization, or members of other organizations to share it within your organizations, to make sure that it's a really useful tool, and it can hopefully be used as a reference, not only for UNFPA coordinators, but also the co-coordinators that come from other organizations.
Stephanie, just to say, it's the answer to one question is it's in the design stage and then it will be shared, although my understanding is it's been shared as is already to some. So I'm sure if you needed it quickly before it goes to the design stage, you can send an email to Stephanie. Maybe Stephanie, you can put your email in the chat. And then also, Stephanie, you were being asked about languages, if it's going to be translated into different languages.
Yes, so we're planning to translate into Spanish, French, and Arabic, and do the layout design for all three. And then we will share it then on the website. But yes, I put my email, so definitely reach out. We've already shared it to coordinators, IMs, I think core members, but perhaps not. But yeah, I mean, it's the content is there, but of course, we did share with core members too. So the content is there. Please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, in a couple of months, it will be all available on the website latest.
Yeah, and just so you know, there was consultations during our core member meeting that we had a few months ago now. But we really hope that our core members will help with this getting buy-in from the human resource people. And as was mentioned by Stephanie, for the UNFPA surge roster, we actually got buy-in before it was even developed, because we wanted to make sure that it was going to be useful and be used, right? Those are kind of two different concepts, be useful and being used. So we did get that commitment from the UNFPA surge roster. I know some of you have decentralized human resource people, so it's good that it will be in different languages, and please do share with people who you think can be influential within your organizations. Lena also wrote about the clarification of the honesty part. Stephanie, isn't it anonymous in the sense that it's not something that we're going to receive people's scores when they assess themselves, right? It's going to be just for the person filling it out. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
So it's anonymous, so you don't have, you can be honest with yourself. If you decide you want to look different to yourself, as Stephanie said, it won't be as useful. It'll be only as useful as you are honest, but it's not a score that anyone from the surge roster or any HR people is going to be able to look at how you scored yourself or where you found that you need to strengthen your competencies. And I think with the Riga, it would be only if they decide to share to the Riga what their results are. It's not going to be something that's automatically channeled to the Riga. So thank you all. Feel free, maybe Hannah J can stick around a little bit longer in case there's new questions coming up in the chat. There is one more from Reem, just asking about how it's relevant for other non-coordination GBV positions. Is there any comment on that?
We did try to make it as specific to GBV coordination and GBV IM as possible, because I think there was also, you know, going into it and hearing in their initial round of consultation the need to really reflect on those specific skills that are sometimes kind of pushed to the side or not as recognized in terms of what it actually takes to be a really effective coordinator and a really effective IM in coordination. I think there's a lot of competencies in there that would be relevant for other non-coordination GBV positions. But in terms of how it could be used in that way, I'm not really sure. I think the initial competencies included both coordination and programming, and I think the challenge there was sometimes distinguishing between the two. So we've gone in the other way to make sure that it's really clear. I'm not sure, Steph or Jennifer.
Just to say, I mean, we also added information management for the first time here, and I like how Hannah phrased it, information management for coordination. And our capacity strengthening strategy did include programming, but not something the GBV AoR will implement. That will be up to the program people. And I think, you know, we've already discussed this whole process with the PSEA people. So if there is an organization that wants to develop competencies for program people, I'm sure Stephanie would be happy to talk them through what we did. So that's an idea for all of you out there if you want to work on that. And Fulvia asked an interesting question about competencies needed for risk mitigation from other clusters. So no, we have not done that. That could be a new phase. Again, it sounds like a great idea if someone wants to take that on, and we'd be happy to talk them through. But yeah, it's something that would be interesting to consider. Let's see how this goes, because I think, as it was already said, it's only as useful as people who use it. And if we see that there's a lot of traction, then maybe we can consider a next phase of broadening it and expanding. Right. Okay. So I think that's it for now, but since there's still some comments and questions coming in, Hannah, please feel free if you can stay another 10 or 15 minutes to answer, or Stephanie can answer in the chat. And yeah, so in light of time, we're going to move now to another sort of very strong operational area, which is another exciting area of development, which is the GBV case management, e-learning and training material, which Isabella Felici from UNFPA Humanitarian Response Division is going to share. And some of you might have already been hearing about this in other spaces, but I find I always learn something new every time I hear a presentation. So, and thank you all who did attend the launch on the case management, and hear that we have a new module for PSEA, and there's a lot happening also within programming. So Isabella can follow up now and talk about the case management, e-learning and training material. Over to you, Isabella.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you for the opportunity to present the e-learning on GBV case management and the training material and implementation node on GBV case management responses to SEA. Those two products were launched 2 weeks ago with a very good participation. More than 1,000 people in total attended the 2 webinars. So if someone of you also attended the webinars 2 weeks ago, this might be a bit repetitive. Please stay connected. Don't drop off, just enjoy your coffee, and you might have some additional questions coming up. And also for those of you who attended the webinar before, it's an opportunity to remind you that we are preparing a post-webinar package, answering all the questions that we received in the chat, and also sharing all the videos, recordings, and PowerPoints. And it's almost ready to be shared. So we will make sure to reach also all of you with the post-webinar package and with today's presentation as well. So I will move forward to share my screen and to say a few words on the launching of the Interagency GBV Case Management Guidelines, e-learning, and the in-person training module on GBV case management responses to SEA. Yeah. See. Okay. First of all, a few words on the background, because those two products have a long history and they date back to a long time ago. And I would like to remind what have been the key steps and the key process in the development of those two products. So first of all, I have to mention the Interagency GBV Case Management Guidelines that, as most of you know and are probably familiar with it, this is a key document for GBV case management actors working in emergency, in humanitarian setting, because this document really sets the standard of quality for compassionate, comprehensive, and survivor-centered care. And this document was created in 2017 and launched by the GBV IMS Steering Committee. As you know, this document has been used in several settings, disseminated, also with train of trainers. And only in 2021, we started the conversation on how to convert those guidelines into an e-learning format. It was also the year of the pandemic, in which, as you know, many of us couldn't travel anymore or deliver in-person trainings, TOT, and therefore UNFPA took the lead to start the conversation on how to make this important document accessible to everyone. So the process started. It was a long process to create the e-learning. We will see later also how participatory the process was and how many countries were involved. And at the same time, the same year in 2021, UNFPA Executive Director, Dr. Natalia Kanem, assumed the Interagency Standing Committee Championship on Protection from Sexual Exploitation and Abuse and Sexual Harassment. And under the umbrella of this championship, there were several commitments taken. And one of those commitments was to deliver and develop an online and in-person training module on gender-based violence case management responses to SEA. So the two processes happened at the same time, and the module on case management responses to SEA is also included in the e-learning format. And at the same time, I also take the opportunity to mention here to everyone that we are also updating the 2017 Interagency GBV Case Management Guidelines, as well under the GBV IMS Steering Committee, and in particular on the Task Force for GBV Case Management. This process recently started, so also the guidelines can be updated and aligned with the most recent development of the e-learning material, and including as well the case management responses to SEA. So once again, just to remind that what we are launching here today are two different but connected products. So on the one side, we have the e-learning, which is based on the GBV case management guidelines and include the additional module on SEA, and also a few improvements on some of the key chapters. And secondly, we have the in-person training module on case management responses to SEA and the newly developed implementation note that help us and guide the public, the facilitators, the case manager to use the training module and the training materials that are now available on case management responses to SEA. And while I'm speaking, I will ask to my colleague Shiva to please share in the chat the link So you will have the links and the information to access both, so you know where to find them. Anyway, just to remind, all the links are accessible from the GBV IMS webpage, and the e-learning is hosted by the UN Staff College. First of all, a few words on the objectives, why we have been doing all this work that lasted almost 3 or 4 years. The main objective, what we want to achieve, is always to improve the quality, the consistency of GBV case management services, to contribute to provide better services and better outcomes for survivors, because we know that implementing GBV case management guidelines enhance the capacity to really respond effectively to GBV incidents. And in order to do so with good quality, we need standardized procedures, and we need best practices, and we need a coordinated and professional response. And that's why we are always aiming to create new tools or to adapt the existing tools and update the existing tools to ensure we have access to the most recent learnings, developments, and that all the GBV actors can have access to standardized and quality guidelines and procedures. So by participating in the e-learnings, what we aim to achieve, what participants will gain is, first of all, a deeper understanding of the principle and practices of GBV case management. Secondly, they will enhance the skills and the knowledge to support survivors effectively. And there are also a lot of practical exercises and quiz to test the knowledge in the e-learning. And third, of course, they will also have access to new resources to facilitate the learning and to facilitate the collaboration and to remain up to date with the most recent developments in our sector. A few words also on the implementation notes for those of you who hasn't seen yet the implementation note. This note really goes in depth and guide you on the appropriate use and implementation of the recently developed training module on GBV case management responses to SEA. So let's remind that this is a module for GBV case managers, GBV case worker, GBV case management supervisor, and GBV case specialists that work on GBV case management. So the main public of this is not the PSEA colleagues, but is really embedded inside the GBV case management guidelines and training modules and materials. But of course, as you know, the collaboration between GBV and PSEA actors, it's very close, it's very strictly connected. So in case you have any questions on some of the specific details, please do not hesitate also to reach out to each other and to use it jointly or make joint effort for the dissemination. So this note clarified the purpose of the training module on GBV case management responses to SEA. It distinguishes and provides clarity as well between GBV case management and SEA survivor assistance. And it also supports the appropriate use and rollout of the module on GBV case management responses to SEA. Now, a few words on the development of all those different products. So as I said at the beginning, the process was very participatory. It's a process that dates back to 2021. The consultation took place at different levels, country level, subnational level, global level. And here in this slide, you can just see a few numbers that gives you the idea of how many GBV and PSEA experts were consulted and how many countries and different settings were reached. Most of the work was done in collaboration with the reference group, a reference group that was actively involved in reviewing the materials, in providing suggestions and checking the step-by-step, but as well in providing support to the content development and to the different level of review of the material that was created. As I mentioned at the beginning, there have been a few improvements and a few changes compared with the guidelines from 2017. As you know, we are now in 2024, and fortunately, there have been a lot of new developments in the field of GBV. A lot also of new documents have been produced. And there have been also improvements in the definition, in the terms that we use, gender and sex, in how we frame intimate partner violence and domestic violence. The concept of diverse SOGI was also introduced in the e-learning with more comprehensive list of definition and terms. Also, there was an update of the information regarding psychosocial support, in particular the chapter on the risk of suicide, which is one of the key and the most challenging, probably, part of the assessment in the GBV case management. And also we included references to new resources that didn't exist in 2017, such as the GBV Cash Compendium Guidance, and also the guidance note on how to design and set up cash assistance in GBV case management. Also, there have been a few improvements in terms of wording and definitions in several of the key chapters. There has been also contextualization of impacts as well as examples of GBV. And of course, as we said, the emphasis on the GBV caseworker's role and clarification on GBV caseworker roles during SCA investigation and in case management for SCA cases. The target audience for this e-learning and for the materials, it's very specific. This is not an introduction, this is not an induction, this is really a specialized, detailed course that requires a significant investment in terms of hours, because this is based on the guidelines. The profiles that we aim to reach are GBV case workers, GBV case managers, case management supervisors, but also MHPSS specialists, GBV specialists, GBV coordinators. So all those specific profiles that really work closely, either implementing GBV case management services or providing technical support and capacity building for GBV case workers. And the type of organizations that can benefit from this e-learning are UN agency, INGOs, NGOs, and of course, women-led organization, local organization, national and local actors. So all actors, it doesn't matter the nationality, the level of those actors. If they are providing GBV case management services, or if they're interested in implementing them, they can benefit from this e-learning. But this is also useful for humanitarian aid workers, project managers, and donors, and people working at different levels or in different roles in your organizations. The key features of the e-learning, well, first of all, this is entirely self-paced. You can take it at your own time based on your availability. We know, especially field workers working in the field at the field level, they are very busy and it's very difficult for them to follow traditional training and courses. So with an e-learning, you can have this independence and this flexibility. The e-learning is structured around 13 modules. There is also a journal where you can write your own reflection or also your questions and then discuss your questions with your supervisor. There is a library of global resources where you can find all the relevant resources for GBV case management and GBV and emergency programming in general. and you will receive a certificate of completion at the end of the course if you achieve and pass the 80% of the different level and exams, let's say quizzes, at the end of each module. And for technical problem, you can reach out to the help desk email, which you will find inside the course instruction. What's very relevant to share here today is some strategies and some suggestions on how you can use the e-learning and the training module. So we received a lot of comments also in the chat during the webinar about the importance of keeping the in-person relationship with case workers, because as we all know, an e-learning cannot replace the technical experience that we share during an in-person training. Because if some of you ever attended a course, a training on GBV case management, or if you are certified trainers on GBV case management, you know during the in-person training how many simulations we do. And this is really a key part of the learning, because we have simulation of conversation, of difficult conversation between a case worker and a survivors, and those are essentials. So how can you use the e-learning but without replacing the important in-person dynamics that you might have in your context, in your organization, or in your at your national or subnational level, also as a coordination structure? So first of all, you can incorporate this e-learning into the training requirements of your organization. We know organizations have different mandatory e-learnings to undertake before starting. So an idea and a suggestion is to introduce this as part of your mandatory learning for GBV profiles, for case workers. You can also use the e-learning and make it as a hybrid strategy. You can, for instance, ask to your colleagues, to your case workers in your organizations to take a couple of sessions online, and then you can have an in-person or virtual session to discuss it together, to answer questions, to include a simulation, for instance. So you can use it in your own way and create a mixed hybrid method. You can also use it with the new staff for the introduction. You can use it with more experienced and very experienced case managers for the continuous learning. Since the e-learning is free and you can navigate it in a flexible way, an experienced case manager or supervisor can also go directly to the specific module that she wants to refresh, or where she feels like she needs an update on that module. She can go directly to that module. Or you can also...
We have only a couple minutes left.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. I'm finalizing with this slide. You can also use it to reduce the number of days for in-person trainings. If you have tight budget and you cannot have an 8-10 days training, you can use the e-learning to reduce the number of days where you can meet in person. And of course, you can use it at interagency level. I know there are a lot of coordinators here in the call, and you can think about creative way to use it to ensure a consistent understanding of guidelines, policy, and procedures, and to ensure standardized training in your country. So you have access to the e-learning in English and French, and very soon, by the end of this week, probably in Spanish, and hopefully by the end of the year in Arabic. And the training modules are already available in English, French, and Spanish, and upcoming soon also in Arabic. Thank you very much.
Please do, we're running out of time, and I don't want to cut the last two people. We have a presentation coming up from Coordination in Iraq on strengthening localization, and also on progress in the interagency multi-sectoral review of adolescent girls. But you do have one question in the chat, and maybe you can respond in the chat from UNHCR, from Constance, asking about if this is a GBV IMS product. And Constance, just to say, these are two different products, so you might have two different responses. I believe that the SEA GBV module is a UNFPA under the championship, but the e-learning, you can respond, Isabella, because we see that UNHCR collaborated, and maybe you can just point out in the chat the different agencies and organizations that collaborated with the e-learning, including translations.
Yes,
so then
thank you very much. I'm not sure, Constance, if you were connected at the beginning of the presentation where we explained how it was developed under the umbrella of the GBV IMS and the reference group that was created in 2021 to develop it.
Great, thank you. So if you have any more questions for Isabella, please do feel free to put them in the chat. And I believe also the launch was recorded and it was very well done and had a number of people presenting. And that can also, I think, be shared again if you haven't seen it. So now we're going to go over, thank you so much, Isabella. We're going to now move to Kristen Perry from the Seed Foundation, who's going to talk about strengthening local GBV coordination in Iraq. Over to you, Kristen.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you to the team as well for the invitation to speak to you all today. I'm delighted to have this opportunity. For those of you who were at the GBC, the Global Protection Conference last month, you've probably already heard a rapid fire version of this same presentation, but I will go into a bit more depth than we had space and time to do at that engagement. So my name is Kristen. I'm a policy and advocacy advisor at Seed Foundation. And today I'm just going to share a little bit about Seed's work to strengthen local coordination of the response to GBV in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, following the recent transition from humanitarian to development designation. So first, let me begin by introducing Seed. So Seed is a local women-led nonprofit organization in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Our mission is to protect, empower, and support survivors of violence and others at risk. And Seed delivers comprehensive services to those in need. We also build capacity through education and training, particularly of frontline service providers. And we focus on strengthening rights and protections for vulnerable groups through advocacy and technical assistance to government and other stakeholders. We do this across several protection thematics, which include GBV, child protection, trafficking in person, and others. But obviously today's presentation will focus on our coordination work to support effective prevention of and response to gender-based violence in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. To give you a little bit of background on Iraq, Iraq is one of the worst places in the world for women. It was ranked 154th out of 156 countries by the Global Gender Gap Index in 2021, and 168th out of 177 countries by the Women, Peace, and Security Index in their roundup of 2023. GBV is endemic throughout the country, including in the Kurdistan region. Now, concrete data is difficult to obtain and underreporting of GBV is prevalent, but the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security in their 2023 report noted that 45% of women in Iraq have experienced intimate partner violence in the last year, which is the highest rate of recent IPV in the world. And a 2021 UN Women's Survey indicated that 70% of female survivors of online violence had been exposed within the last year. So it's important to note for those first two stats that these are incidence rates, not prevalence rates, but incidence rates reflecting recent experiences within the last year. While it's estimated that 2/3 of the region's women do not report online violence either, the incidence rate in MENA in 2021 was 98%, which is significantly higher than the global incidence rate of 85%. So 75% of those at risk of GBV in Iraq are women and girls. Honor killings, femicide, female genital mutilation, and early marriage remain prevalent. And of course, when ISIS invaded Iraq 10 years ago now, it deployed conflict-related sexual violence as an act of genocide. For those affected, the ongoing risks of GBV were significantly exacerbated thereafter by protracted displacement, poverty, lack of livelihoods, multi-stressed family units, and widespread exposure to violence and conflict, and then further exacerbated and amplified during the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, the shift from humanitarian to development designation in Iraq, which took place at the end of 2022, significantly diminished funding and triggered a rapid withdrawal of international actors, heightening protection needs while dramatically reducing available resources and support. And at the time of transition, close to 1 million people remained at risk of GBV, as per the Iraq Humanitarian Needs Overview of 2022. So it was in this context that the GBV Sector Coordination Group was established. As part of the transition to development designation in Iraq, the humanitarian cluster system was dissolved at the end of 2022, and the GBV Sector Coordination Group replaced Iraq's GBV subcluster. As far as we and our international partners are aware, this is a new transitional model for continued coordination of non-emergent response. We are not aware of another example of a country cluster system closing down and shifting to a similar model as part of localization processes, but would obviously love to hear from you if you have examples and experiences to share. The establishment of this group reflected a series of really unique circumstances in Iraq. So there was a combination of confidence that the humanitarian mandate in Iraq had concluded. There was also recognition of ongoing and outstanding needs, a strong belief that the government can and should take responsibility for those needs, and existing political will and commitment toward combating GBV. The GBV Sector Coordination Group also represents a unique partnership between government and non-government actors in Iraq, which is a really challenging context. Sorry, can we stay on the previous slide for a bit longer? Thank you so much. It's a unique partnership between government and non-government actors in Iraq, and this is a really challenging space, shrinking civil society, remit, and very real capacity and resource constraints in the public sector. So the formation of this mechanism demonstrates a mutual desire and willingness from both sides to improve coordination across geographic locations and between diverse government and non-government actors to facilitate a strong response to GBV. So this says quite a bit about political will in the KRI specifically, because the space for engagement on gender and GBV is far more limited in federal Iraq at present. Those of you who are tracking gender backlash around the globe may be aware of what's been happening in Iraq recently. And finally, the GBV Sector Coordination Group represents an attempt to shift from an internationally led response via the cluster system to a locally led response architecture as part of humanitarian closure and ongoing localization efforts. We're still in the middle of piloting this very experimental model. So much of how this will work in practice is still to be borne out. We can move to the next slide. So what is it actually like? The GBV Sector Coordination Group is a voluntary consortium of governmental and non-governmental protection actors. It's jointly chaired by the Kurdistan Regional Government Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs and SEED, with interim support being provided during the transitional period by UNFPA. The GBV Sector Coordination Group aims to ensure a coherent, effective, and survivor-centered response to combating GBV that addresses the ongoing humanitarian needs and integrates longer-term sustainable development approaches to enable the achievement of a strong protective environment for survivors, those at risk, and other vulnerable groups in the Kurdistan region. It supports, and it is also supported by governorate-level working groups in Erbil, Duhok, Suleimani, and Halabja governorates. It has 3 key objectives. The first is coordination, to support multi-directional and timely information sharing, build linkages to promote collaboration, ensure complementarity, and avoid duplication, and facilitate the delivery of frontline protection services to those in need. A second objective is prioritization, to assess needs, identify gaps, particularly in this nexus period, reach clarity on key priorities, and inform the development and design of broader response strategies into the future. And then the third objective is capacity strengthening, to build collective capacity to respond to GBV, and also to streamline and unify approaches across the sector in line with both governmental priorities and international standards, which at times is a delicate balance. We can progress to the next slide. So it's been a rich and very busy first year of getting this new response mechanism off the ground. So in this time period, we established the GBV Sector Coordination Group. We signed a 3-way memorandum of understanding with MULSA, SEED, and UNFPA, and we agreed on both regional and governorate level TORs through robust consultative processes with relevant actors. We launched governorate level working groups to replace those that had been operating under the UN-led GBV subcluster, identifying government chairs and NGO co-chairs for each, and expanding the apparatus as well into underserved areas through the establishment and activation of a new working group in Halabja, with more ideally to follow. We convened and supported regular meetings at the regional and governorate levels with robust representation from diverse government agencies, as well as UN entities and local and international NGOs. We reestablished service mapping and referral pathways to facilitate coordination between GBV actors. We have consolidated, we've contextualized, and we've shared technical resources across the sector coordination group and its working groups as needed. We've also conducted GBV technical capacity assessments and delivered GBV, technology facilitated GBV, and case management trainings for protection actors. And then we also engaged in advocacy and awareness raising activities by hosting conferences, roundtables, and workshops, and implementing activities across the sector to mark the 16 days of activism. We're hoping to expand this work in new directions in the coming year, but that felt like quite a lot for our first year of existence. And we can move to the next slide. So despite the many highlights from our first year, there have also been numerous challenges. There is a lack of available data and data collection capacity outside the UN structure, which has emerged as a key gap. The organization of the sector coordination group and affiliated working groups is also quite taxing for smaller and less resourced entities to manage, especially without additional funding and staff. It's an add-on that wasn't there before. There's also been, at the same time, a substantial reduction in humanitarian funds as a result of the transition, and development funding has yet to scale up to cover that gap. So we're in this interim space. The public sector itself, with government involvement, is also grossly under-resourced, particularly on protection. And this leadership role, again, is an extra. In other words, it's an unfunded responsibility for our government partners. There's a huge need for multi-directional capacity strengthening, as government actors and local organizations alike lack technical GBV expertise. In the aftermath of the humanitarian transition, and without the sponsorship and partnership of international entities, many local GBV actors and organizations are either not equipped to continue their work or actively participate in the GBV sector coordination group, or they may require practical support to write proposals and obtain direct funding of their own. So all told, there are many critical, outstanding issues in the protection space, but just simply fewer actors and resources available to tackle them. We can move to the next slide. So the establishment of the sector coordination group has yielded some lessons learned about the humanitarian aid cycle, the localization process, and the achievement of durable solutions that could be useful in other country contexts. Interventions in the wake of a humanitarian crisis should be assessed from the outset in terms of both opportunity and risk. Key opportunities are presented by this sudden influx of financial resources and expertise, international attention, and partnership. But if that influx is not managed from the outset with a focus on localization and sustainability, it can lead to INGOization, the creation of parallel systems and unsustainable dependencies, and a concentration of power and decision-making capacity among international players that complicates the eventual transition, phase out, and localization processes. Additionally, the response to key protection thematics should be fully localized, ideally, prior to humanitarian transition and withdrawal. International actors should seek to intentionally, tactically, and strategically invest their resources in supporting locally led processes, building the capacity of local actors, both government and non-government, and meaningfully divesting leadership from the outset and over a long-term time horizon to avoid abrupt handover of key responsibilities in a context where information and processes have been largely siloed. So, for example, in Iraq, government actors were not meaningfully involved in the internationally led humanitarian response mechanisms like the cluster system on the whole. And they were not generally aware of those structures or very familiar with their resources. And we've noticed that's definitely had an impact on their ability to step into and lead the sector coordination group. Another thing we've observed is that key agreements should ideally be secured with local interlocutors before transition and withdrawal to ensure continuity in the response and avoid unnecessary disruptions. Funding structures from the outset in terms of humanitarian aid should be integrated, and hybrid programming developed to synergize these humanitarian and development approaches and allow vital support and services to remain operational even as designations shift, and address the gaps left by transitional periods when the humanitarian response winds down, but before the development response scales up, to mitigate the impact of withdrawal, which we know eventually is inevitable. We've also observed that it would be recommended for donors to increase direct funding to national and local NGOs where possible, rather than through international intermediaries, to mitigate inequality and dependencies and promote local engagement and leadership. So that's a bit about what has emerged for us in this process. But I'll stop there and welcome any questions in the interest of time.
Thank you. You did that actually in a very timely way. So we do have a few more minutes for questions and answers. I see that Fulvia is asking if you have any understanding of what has been the impact of the transition on GBV service provision in particular.
I mean, I think the impacts have been multifaceted, but that in itself is part of what we've noticed, that it's been difficult to come up with a clear picture of where the gaps and key priorities are because of disruptions in information management resulting from handover. As funding shrank, NGO actors who were active in the space closed or ended programming, international actors left. And so all of the people who were, I mean, it's not like there aren't still remaining actors in Iraq. There are these sort of interim actors, but a lot of the sources of information and those who would feed into a broader picture of what's going on in terms of GBV prevention and response largely disappeared. And the sort of key holders who are pulling all of those threads together, collecting the data from partner organizations, analyzing it and sharing it back, largely don't exist at this stage. So, or are not operational to the degree that they were. So it's actually difficult to know exactly where all of the remaining gaps and priorities are, which is why one of the first things we did in the first year was reestablish service mapping to figure out who's still here, what they're doing, and what sources of information they have, and reestablish referral mechanisms as well. So we're very much in the process of rebuilding in a localized, contextualized, sustainable way. Like, it's not going to look the way it did under international leadership, and that's something that we need to recognize. The same resources are not there. the same data collection capacity is not there. However, we're in the process of taking everything that was done as part of the humanitarian cluster system and trying to create local mechanisms that achieve those same ends in a parallel way and at a sustainable scale, with the hope that, of course, we can grow from there. But we're in a rebuilding process, I would say. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
So there's a lot of comments in the chat. Constance is saying that this lessons learned need to be shared widely and translated into concrete policy and guidance.
that's a great recommendation. I love the idea of the advocacy note. That's something I could probably work on and share out. That's a great suggestion.
So Anna Stone, who's the Riga Fulvio, pointed this out, and she's working on this. There was also at the Global Protection Cluster, the laboratory on transition. UNICEF started off working on a document on transitions and deactivation with a consultant as looking at under their EMOPS, which is looking at their 3 clusters and their child protection AoR. And it was expanded under the Global Cluster Coordination Group to include all clusters so that it's a GCCG document. GCCG is like the same as the ICCG, but at the global level. And that document is currently sitting with YASC OPEG to be endorsed. So that document will be out soon. And I think, this is an area that people recognize it did not go well in Iraq. The way the transition was dealt with was not ideal. I think also a lot of cluster coordinators knew their job was ending, so they ended up moving to Ukraine. Because a lot of Iraq people now, people who worked in Iraq now who went to Ukraine.
And that's another thing that emerged was like, there are broader lessons for how we do humanitarian aid across the sector, because we know that international resources, whether that's technical capacity, whether that's finances, whatever it may be, can be abruptly rerouted elsewhere in response to emerging conflict situations. We know that's a possibility. That's always on the radar. So how do we need to be thoughtful and mindful of the ways in which our interventions interface with and support existing systems and processes from the get-go to mitigate that impact of eventual and inevitable withdrawal? Like, we just need a longer term lens, I think, on some of these issues. I am seeing a lot of comments in the chat. I will share my email afterwards. Actually, I can just pop it in the chat now for anyone who's interested, and I can connect you to the team. But yes, it's something I'm happy to speak further about. It's something that we're
and we know that the government, even if the government agrees to take on working groups that have already been existing, their funding capacity is not the same. Donors don't start giving to governments suddenly the money they were giving to international organizations, UN, and INGOs. And that's,
absolutely. And
I see when it comes to salaries, right?
Oh, for sure. And for just concrete application of concrete tools and mechanisms that are already in existence. So for instance, I see in the chat what this means for GBV IMS. There's no funding to support government in managing that. And that's expensive, the management of something like that. So that is something that we're looking into as well and trying to identify contingency plans for, because the finances are a barrier.
Yeah.
And
I think we talk a lot about, nexus and continuum, but the reality is that there's this expectation that the development actors will step in, and they often don't step in or don't step in time. And there's an impression sometimes that it's easier to get humanitarian funding than development funding, so the HRP process gets continued. So I think there's a lot of challenges, but at least the clusters are raising these issues, and it does need to be looked at a higher level. But, like I said, the document will be coming out soon on deactivation and transitions. The only place I know, Uganda did have a transition many years ago, like moving to become advisory groups to the government. So Rosalita, who is now the humanitarian coordinator in Bangladesh, was in Uganda when that happened. So it might be interesting to get in touch with her, and I mean, it was a long time ago. But it could be interesting to hear where that's at even today in Uganda. Because I know that the working groups to continue, but I think I'm not sure if they were. I think they were part of the government. And
Jennifer, it's really hard to hear you. I don't know if it's your at your end. Several of us are not able to hear properly.
let me see.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Much better.
So just quickly, because I want to leave time for Christine Heckman. In Uganda, many years ago, when they deactivated their clusters, I know that the GBV working groups transitioned to become advisory groups for the government as part of the government, I believe. So UNFPA has the humanitarian coordinator currently, Rosalita is her name, who's currently in Bangladesh, and she might have some insights into what they did. That was at least 10 years ago, but it could be interesting to hear if that role has integrated further into the government structure, or if it ended due to lack of resources and funding, or if they feel like they don't need that anymore because they have the internal capacities. But that could be someone to check with to see how that transition happened. That's the only country I know that has done that. And I do know, like Honduras, they're deactivating at the end of December. And so they have currently, at least the GBV actors have questions around the transition. We know Libya is looking at this, and everyone says we need to do it differently than it was done in Iraq. But like we said, already named some of the funding challenges as well as other types of challenges. So yeah, it's recognized as a problem, but I think the solutions are still not completely found. And I see that Osama has a hand up, so over to you, Osama.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Thank you. I hope you all are doing well after the GPC in Kenya. I was one of the victims to get COVID.
Oh no! Oh
Yeah,
no!
last
Sorry
day.
about
I
that.
realized that I think it was Claudia who got the COVID too.
Oh, I didn't even hear that until now.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I just need like 1 minute.
Go ahead. You're
I have
another
a
expert. Yeah. Another Iraq expert.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I have a comment and a request too. Well, according to my request, as Christine mentioned, by the way, thank you very much, Christine. It was a very informative presentation, and it reflected, like I can say, everything that we've been going through in Iraq. I was a GBV subcluster co-coordinator previously. But NCA, as the co-lead of the GBV subcluster, has dedicated some budget to support the co-lead, the local co-leads and the government as well. So I myself, I do support Iraq in terms of this, but as Christine mentioned, Iraq is way suffering way beyond what we are thinking. Like if we compare Kurdistan region and the central government of Iraq, it's really bad. This is how I can put it. So my request is that on the level of Iraq, IHAW is co-leading the GBV sector. It would be very, very useful to share their insights as well, if we can dedicate some time for them as well to make a presentation as they did, to hear about the colleagues, what we have been through in the development phase. So this is the first thing. And according, in regards to my comment, on the advocacy note, before the deactivation of the subclusters and after the deactivation, NCA and UNFPA, along with the UNICEF colleagues with the child protection subcluster and the GBV subcluster, we've been developing an advocacy note. By that time, I think it was Tema Murphy. We were working on that advocacy note. But according to, shifting the staff and changing the positions, that advocacy note has stopped at some point at the very, very last stages of finalizing the advocacy note. I had the chance to talk with Anna Stone in Nairobi, but still we haven't continued our discussion yet. So this is something that we can start, instead of starting an advocacy note from zero, we can build on that one. I still have it. We can share it, see it, and how on the level of Iraq and see it on the level of Kurdistan can collaborate on this along with the GBV AoR if we can take this further. These were my 2 points, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank
Oh,
you,
so-
and thank you for all the time. Oh, no. Okay, I just am seeing the message from Christine. Christine, do you want to take these 3 minutes and then we'll go back to responding on this question? You want to just take off your mic?
I don't, sorry, I don't want to disrupt the flow. So we can also do, as I said in the chat, whichever you prefer.
Well, go ahead and then we can go back to finishing the transition. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, everybody. I have to chair a call. So I didn't want to drop off completely without announcing anything. But yeah, I'm Christine from UNICEF. I think on this call a few months ago, my colleague Catherine Poulton shared an update that UNFPA and UNICEF executive directors had jointly committed to doing a deep dive multi-sectoral analysis of one humanitarian response and how well or maybe not the response as a whole is meeting the needs of adolescent girls. So the main update is that we have selected a context. It was done in collaboration with an interagency technical working group. The context will be Northeast Nigeria. Plans are very well underway with coordination at the field level. Thanks to April and OCHA for helping us get that rolling. And if anyone does have field colleagues based in Nigeria that you think should be part of this conversation, please do let Lara or Isabella know, and we can link up those pieces. I'm also happy to share the background again on the project as a whole, if helpful. Thanks.
And Christine, just to say, one of our 2 global core members is based in Nigeria, in Northeast Nigeria. So
excellent.
We get Fatima on board with this, as well as the coordinator, which is here. So
Wonderful.
we have
Thank
very
you.
good connections, because Call to Action, as Christine Apio has tons of connections, since Nigeria was one of the Call to Action countries. So lots of connections in that location. So great, thank you, Christine. And we'll have you give us a bit more of an update in the next call with more details of how it's going. Thanks. So going back just to finish, sorry, I was going to ask for an additional 5 minutes, but I didn't realize Christine had another call. But just to go back to the question of transitions and the advocacy, I think that there is a very good document to build on. And I saw that there are others interested in this topic. And I know that Anna Stone does want to work on this from the region. So if there's others who want to put their name in the chat or send us an email if you would like to take part in providing inputs or insights, we can also send a draft at a later stage after we put together the current document and add in some additions. And then also, like I said, we can actually have somebody come on if there's interest to a call to share the document that's being produced by the Global Cluster Coordination Group and present that. So I recognize that a number of people are jumping off. to other calls. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today. I think it's been a very rich discussion. We always do try to combine experiences from the field together with new tools being developed at the global level with contributions from the field. And it's always great to see such a wonderful combination of core members and coordinators and academics and different GBV actors from the community, so including donors. So thank you all for joining, and we will see you for the next. And thank you all for joining in July, because it's a challenging time to get people, and we had a pretty good turnout. So thank you all, and we will be in touch for the next call. If you have any questions that weren't answered, send us an email. We'll be happy to get back to you. And thank you to all of our presenters. You did a great job and made this a very interesting call. Thank you. Bye.